As the German invasion of France progressed successfully during the summer of 1940, German forces made an astounding discovery outside the village of Meurs, about 50 kilometers south of Neufchâteau. Standing on the local railway line was a series of flatbed railway cars, each containing an enormous tank. 6 massive behemoths sat motionless and abandoned on the train, itself stuck in a jam of 5 other military trains trying to move south away from the rapidly advancing Germans, their further progress blocked by a fuel train that had been set alight by German aircraft. As the Germans walked along the railway line, staring up at the colossal tanks, they realized that they had captured the pride of the French armed forces. Tanks that had been at the forefront of propaganda efforts to show the French people that their motherland was militarily superior to the Germans and would resist the invasion. But, ironically, the tanks were all immobilized, not by German fire, but by their own crews, who had blown them up before fleeing. All but one of the 6 was badly damaged or burned out. What the Germans had found on the railway line was the sad remnants of not only the biggest tanks in the French army, but the biggest operational tanks in history up to the present time, the famed Char 2C, the 69-ton land battleships that were adored and admired by the people of France. Ironically, the French army had never asked for or desired such a tank when first conceived in 1916 at the height of the First World War. Rather, the gargantuan vehicles were born of a desire to make money. French industry actively used senior officers and high officials to obtain juicy defense contracts, and the decision to design and build the Char 2C originated in an order from General Léon Muret, the Sub-Secretary of Artillery for the French Army. Muret commissioned the FCM shipyard in Toulon to design and build a new tank. The order coincided with the first use of tanks in combat by the British, the Battle of the Somme in 1916. French public opinion was behind the development of French tanks, and there was a belief that tanks could break the deadlock of trench warfare on the Western Front. Minister of Armaments Albert Thomas demanded a tank superior to the British Mark I. He even tried to have Britain transfer some Mark I's to the French, but nothing came of it. Thomas then ordered French tanks that were faster, better armed and armoured than the British types, at least 40 tons in weight, able to withstand light artillery shells and able to cross a trench up to 3.5 meters in width. Renault was already developing what became the Renault FT light tank, but Renault collaborated with FCM in the creation of the Char 2C. Many arguments followed over the design, armament, and weight. Eventually, a design for what became the Char 2C emerged, and it was planned that 300 would be ready by March 1919. When the war ended in November 1918, not one Char 2C had been built. Even though peace had broken out, the French government decided in April 1919 to buy 10 Char 2Cs. All of the tanks were delivered by 1921. The tank was enormous. When fully loaded, the Char 2C weighed 69 tons. The only other operational tank to ever come close in weight was the World War II German Tiger II, or King Tiger. At full length, the vehicle was 12 meters long, nearly 3 meters wide, and 3.8 meters tall. When its cupola was added, the Char 2C was just over 4 meters in height. The tank's armor thickness was impressive by World War I standards, 30 millimeters at the front, 22 at the sides, 13 on top, and 10 millimeters at the bottom. During rebuilds in 1930 to 31, the frontal armor was increased to 45 millimeters. Internally, the tank was divided into 2 fighting compartments and an engine compartment. The forward compartment mounted a 3-man turret that had to be reached using a ladder. armed with a shortened 75mm field gun dating from 1897, with a second smaller turret at the rear with a Hotchkiss 8mm machine gun. Both turrets had stroboscopic cupolas. There were 3 more 8mm machine guns in ball mounts around the vehicle. The tank was powered initially by 2 captured German Mercedes 200 horsepower engines that were later replaced by 2 250 horsepower Maybach engines, giving a maximum speed of 15 kilometers an hour. 7 fuel tanks gave a range of 150 kilometers. Able to cross voids up to 4¼ meters wide, it could climb 70% slopes and weighed to a depth of 1.4 meters. 12 men crewed the Char 2C, a driver, commander, gunner, loader, 4 machine gunners, a mechanic and electrician, an assistant electrician mechanic, and a radio operator. But the big issue with the Char 2C was how quickly it became obsolete. Certainly by the early 1930s, the type could easily be knocked out by most anti-tank guns. But despite its obvious problems, the French did not retire them, and in 1939 all 10 examples were formed into a special unit, the 51st Tank Battalion. And each individual tank, as well as possessing a 2-digit identification number, also received the name of an ancient region of France. The French army used the tanks to help prop up civilian morale after the outbreak of war in September 1939, and the massive vehicles certainly looked formidable as they were filmed driving through walls and fording streams. It was as if Maginot Line forts had grown tracks. What chance would the Germans have against such superb examples of French armoured might if they were foolish enough to invade? But the Germans did invade, and their little Panzer Is and Panzer 38Ts cut a swathe through the French and British armies in June 1940. Knowing their limitations, the French High Command did not send the 51st Tank Battalion into combat. Instead, they tried to preserve the tanks by shipping them south away from the Germans. 6 of the Char 2Cs were loaded onto rail transporters and stopped by the block line. 5 were blown up by their crews, leaving only scrap for the Germans, but number 99, called Champagne, was not damaged because the charge failed to go off and was captured intact. Of the other 4 Char 2Cs, 2 were also captured damaged but sufficiently intact to be taken as war trophies. The Germans wasted no time in testing their anti-tank guns on the Char 2Cs as they found aboard the train. 2 of the tanks, number 90, Poteau, and number 97, Normandy, were struck repeatedly by German anti-tank shells. The tanks were then carefully inspected for damage and the holes marked. A third tank, number 96, Anjou, was captured in a French repair facility and similarly shot up by the Germans. As for the intact example, number 99, its fate is a little mysterious. Photos exist showing that the tank was initially claimed by Panzer Regiment 10. The Germans had a policy of sending intact examples of enemy armor for testing at their facility at Kummersdorf near Berlin. Number 99 may have been sent to Germany for tests and still been in storage when the facility was captured by the Red Army in April 1945. Several French histories of the Char 2C state that this was the fate of the tank. However, the Soviets and later the Russians never displayed it at their famous tank museum at Kubinka near Moscow up to the present day. Was it scrapped, or does it remain in secret storage to avoid a diplomatic row with France? It remains a mystery to the present day. As with all other attempts made by countries at building super tanks, the Char 2C was an expensive failure that did little to help defend its nation in either world war. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also hit the bell icon to receive notifications of my latest films. You can also help support my channel at PayPal and Patreon, details in the description box.